In the early 80s, when most kids were riding round on BMXs or whizzing along on skateboards, mobile phones were only a thing of dreams. E.T. the Extraterrestrial was first shown in cinemas, and Duran Duran were topping the charts. Home computers were starting to become the must-have item in any home. There was a large selection of computers to choose from, with the likes of Commodore, Sinclair, Acorn, Oric, Tandy and Dragon to name just a few. With the promise from these manufacturers that their machine would run your business, help with children's homework and sort out your family finances, the choice was overwhelming. Some of these adverts from these computer manufacturers would show a family hunched around this small machine, all with big smiles on their faces. I'm not sure why the kid was smiling when the computer screen was showing nothing but a spreadsheet or graphs. Once you had read every advert, compared each computer's good points and bad points, you were then ready to make your choice. Once this choice was made and you had splashed out on the computer and either a cassette recorder or a disk drive, you then had the task of setting up your new piece of electronic wizardry. Chances are you connected it to the family TV. You switched the computer on and you were presented with a screen like this if you had a ZX Spectrum, or this if you had a Commodore 64. Fortunately, most computers came with its own version of the programming language BASIC. BASIC is an acronym of Beginner's All-Purpose Symbolic Instruction Code. The manual would come with some basic programs to type in. These were generally simple programs to draw a flag or show days of the week. Sometimes there may be some game listings, but these were very basic games like Hangman or Mastermind. Most of the manual was a basic introduction to the BASIC language, and some users took the time to learn the language and write their own games or applications. Some people would try and sell these programs. Adverts would appear in the back of magazines for these games and software. Software such as pools predictors, horse racing tipsters, and one of the most famous games in BASIC was Football Manager by Kevin Toms. He was so proud of the game, he put his face in every advert and on the cover of every game. Some of the software would be submitted to and published in one of the many computer magazines that were available. Magazines like Computer and Video Games, Your Computer, Sinclair User and Sinclair Programs were just a few of the popular ones. The basic listing generally would only work on the computer it was written on, so a game written on the Commodore 64 would not work on the Sinclair ZX Spectrum, and vice versa. A lot of patience was required to type these programs in. On most 8-bit computers, the basic language instructions were typed in line by line and letter by letter. Any spelling errors in the basic instructions would not be spotted until the program was run. The Sinclair range of computers was a little different, as each key had basic keywords, functions or names, and these would be entered with either a single key press or the pressing of the shift keys. The flashing cursor would display a letter to show what would appear when the key was pressed. It was a bit of an art form typing programs on the Sinclair machines. This was loved by some and hated by others. Generally, anybody who owned a Commodore would mock the Spectrum's rubber keyboard. Let's look at a listing. As I was a Spectrum owner back in the 1980s, the listing I'm using is from the 1983 April edition of Sinclair User. I am sure now that all the Commodore users have switched off. The listing I'm looking at is called Fives. I chose this as I vividly remember typing this in many times to play because I did not have a tape recorder to save the file. Look at that listing. The muscle-bound hero, which will be you, is destroying those evil number 5s with one swipe of his hand. Who wouldn't want to play this game? So where do we start? First of all, you type in the line number, followed by the basic instructions on each line. When you get to the end of the line, press enter and do the same for the next line. This is repeated until you have entered every line. If you type in any listings, it's always good practice to save them before you try to run the listing, just in case something goes wrong. I won't break down the basic instructions and what they do, as there are many other videos out there that do this. The listing is basically a continuous loop that detects keyboard inputs, moves the main character depending on which key has been pressed, and checks for collisions and updates the score. So we have read the description, looked at the artwork, typed in the listing and saved our work. Now for the moment of truth, type the basic instruction, run and get ready for the good times to begin. The game itself is described as a surround game with extras. Using the cursor keys, you steer yourself around the screen, attempting to snaffle as many of the randomly appearing figure 5s as possible. You get 5 points for collecting the 5 and lose 10 if you cut your tail. The author of this game 5s is Philip Williams, and he came from Devon in the UK. I don't know if he ever got any money for having this listing printed, or just the kudos was enough. But if you are watching this, Philip, please let me know in the comments. A few years later, when the 16-bit machines took hold of the home computer market, these computers came with graphic user interfaces, so BASIC was not the first thing you saw when you switched the computer on. The BASIC that was supplied with these computers was generally pretty bad. Then, like an angel descending from the heavens, surrounded by a glowing light, the BASIC lovers' prayers were answered by Francois Lionnet. Francois gave us his version of BASIC on the Atari ST called STOS, and on the Amiga called Amos. Both of these were sold commercially and were brilliant. Listings would appear in magazines again, but these were mainly subroutines. But for those of us who found machine code beyond our abilities, our imagination could once again be set free. Magazines would have courses every month. Programmers of BASIC could release their work into the public domain. There was even a PD library made up entirely of programs and games written in Amos. Additions were made to the Amos and STOS BASIC interpreter that would allow the creation of 3D objects and to compile your program into an executable standalone file. As you will probably be able to tell, I am a big fan of BASIC, and I still get excited when I boot up my copy of Amos. I have most of the version of Amos in my collection, including a few books and add-ons. The heyday of BASIC as a language may probably be a thing of the past, but when I am at work and I am creating a formula in a spreadsheet or writing a query in Access, a lot of what I learned on my ZX Spectrum I am still using today, just not with as much fun. Where would we be today without that little flashing cursor?